Everyone to meeting number 48, the House of Commons Senate Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, also known, of course, as the mighty OGO. Before we start, I want to thank the members' interest in the 1064 meeting today, mostly because I've had some OGO withdrawal over the last couple months. Now, we are meeting today on a request pursuant to a Standing Order 1064 to discuss study on the situation of the Gordie Howe Bridge. Mr. Elbas, I see your hand up, and we will start taking speaking orders.
Great.
Sorry, which one first? Mr. Danko? Okay, thank you. Please go ahead, Mr. Elbas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's regrettable that we have to be here today because I do know that there's many different events that different members can be at, but events aside, this is an issue of national prominence, and I hope that today's committee's proceedings give it its due. It is incredibly important for us as parliamentarians to have factual information. Obviously, if a minister makes a misrepresentation in the House of Commons, there are rules that allow for us to immediately challenge those things, and for the Speaker to ask for that minister or that even a Prime Minister to come into order. Because this House of Commons, it's important for us to have accurate information so we can make good decisions on behalf of our constituents. And when it comes to the Gordie Howe Bridge, I welcome the new bridge. I think that this is something that the previous Harper government worked very hard to secure a strong deal that worked both for Canadians as well as for the other side. And it was decided, because of the politics at the time, to have it where Canadians would fund the bridge. But this was no small undertaking. And since then, Canadian workers have worked very hard to fulfill that end of the promise and to build a great bridge that we can use to the benefit of our economy. But it troubles me, Mr. Chair, that the Prime Minister, in his statement to the press at Stampede, regardless of what he was wearing, a cowboy hat or otherwise, he made specific, he said what was in the deal. And he made specific gave details from what was in that particular agreement that he had come to with the Trump administration. And then at a second press conference of his on July 17th, he reiterated those same points. And what we found out from the media was that was not the case at all. Now, some Liberal members actually took umbrage with the fact that Conservatives were pointing to these media reports and actually said that we were spreading misinformation. That turned out, Mr. Chair, to be untrue. It turns out that the Prime Minister made statements that directly contradict what was in the agreement, and he made so multiple times. Now, unfortunately, the rules of the House do not apply at Stampede, nor do they apply at a Prime Minister's press conference. But this is a democracy, and our rules do apply here in this chamber. So it's important for the opposition and for Liberal members themselves to hold the government to account to make sure that Canadians are being given factual information so that we can make good decisions. Now, the fact that these statements were contradictory, the fact that Minister Robertson has told the minister responsible for infrastructure has told media that he will not be releasing fiscal impacts from this side deal arrangement with the Trump administration on revenue, raises a whole host of questions. First of all, I believe that at very first we need to make sure we have proper transparency. Holding a hearing is a first step towards that. Having the parliamentary budget officer being able to model what the financial impacts to the side agreement will have ultimately on the Canadian taxpayer that has funded. And again, I have to give the Canadian taxpayer full credit. We have all collectively felt this was an asset that we needed to have. And to see this capitulation by the Prime Minister to the American side, and then to try to give a false view of it, whether it was from a lack of personal knowledge. I don't think that someone of his position and background that we can say that, or worse than that, Mr. Chair, if this was in fact a plan by the Prime Minister to convey incorrect information on purpose. To me, that's unfathomable as well. I believe that the highest office in our country deserves to have the highest standards, and I think that we as parliamentarians should demand better of our officials. So again, Mr. Chair, Canadian taxpayers have paid lots of money for this. We all know that there are challenges dealing with the American administration, but Canadians, the taxpayers, are due an explanation as to why this agreement was ratified, why the Prime Minister gave contradicting statements, why when we only found out through the media, and lastly, we need to have more transparency, including financial modeling. And as we've heard from professional economists from across the sphere, there's a National Post story this week that says that the fiscal framework, with so many announcements and so many impacts to the fiscal framework with zero transparency, where even the parliamentary budget officer is having difficulty reconciling what the government makes in announcements and what actually happens. Mr. Chair, it's incredibly disheartening for me as a parliamentarian because I care about this place. I believe that we can make good decisions if we have the right information. I would hope that all members would be supportive of the following motion. Given that the Prime Minister capitulated to American demands regarding Gordie Howe International Bridge toll revenues and subsequently provided inaccurate information to Canadians about the deal, and given that many serious questions remain about the impact of the deal on Canadian taxpayers and businesses, the committee, A, order the Department of Housing, Communities and Infrastructure to produce all drafts of proposed agreement in principle for the new deal related to the Gordie Howe International Bridge within 2 weeks of adoption of this motion. B, send a request to the Parliamentary Budget Officer to conduct a net present value analysis of the Gordie Howe Bridge. C, conduct a study of no less than 5 meetings into this matter, provided that the committee invite the following witnesses to testify separately for 2 hours each. A, Dominic LeBlanc, Minister responsible for Canada-U.S. trade. B, Gregor Robertson, Minister of Infrastructure. C, François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Finance. And D, officials from the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority. And in the interim, report to the House that it calls upon the Prime Minister to incorporate transparency, accuracy, openness, and honesty in all public communications regarding the Canada-U.S. relationship to ensure Canadians have the reliable information they need to navigate the real-world impacts of this strained relationship. So, Mr. Chair, I do hope that this committee will treat this issue with as much seriousness as it deserves and not simply be dismissed. These are basic questions of transparency, something that Canadians should always expect of their government and of their parliamentarians. Thank you.
Thank you. I have it. Foreseeing a motion, I did take the speaking order. I have, just so everyone knows, I have Ms. Landsman, then Mr. Lewis, then Madame Gaudreau, Mr. Gill, Mr. Danko, then Ms. DesRoches, then Ms. Rochefort, then I have Mr. Gasparo, and then Ms. McPherson. Oh, yeah? Okay.
I send it to Natalie.
Okay. We will add you on. We'll start with Ms. Landsman. You have the floor.
Could I just request that we suspend for a minute? We haven't had this provided in advance, and we just like an opportunity to have a quick discussion before we proceed with the rest of the meeting.
Quick 1 minute?
Yep.
Sure. It's in French as well.
Thank you.
start with Ms. Landsman, please. Welcome to Ogo.
Thank you very much. This is exactly the right opportunity to be in Parliament. It's exactly what Parliament's for, and I appreciate being a part of this committee. And it is nice to see some colleagues in person, although I know that there are other important things, I should say, that are going on in constituencies, so it's a shame that we've got to be here. Look, I think on this issue, there are many, many questions swirling for the last number of weeks about a multitude of stories that have been told on the same on the same topic, and that's the Gordie Howe Bridge. And we'll go back a second, but Canada built that bridge. Our ideas, it was our initiative. It was all of the risk on the backs of Canadians. It was our tax dollars that built it, and we paid 100% of the almost $6.5 billion cost of that bridge. And we're expected by the deal signed by Prime Minister Harper to get 100% of that revenue. Now, the Prime Minister is now, what we've learned in those multitude of stories, that the Prime Minister is now giving 50% of that toll revenue to Washington. And that's not exactly what he told us when asked the question in Calgary. He said, quote, "We get the revenues," in implying that toll revenues would not be split until the debt of the entire bridge, that's $6.5 billion of taxpayer money, that was spent. So we now know that was false. And I think that Canadians have a number of questions around why that is. Canada will now split. We've learned that Canada will now split the revenues 50-50, despite being the only country that put $6.5 billion in. And if that is not the case, then I'm sure that members of committee would provide all of the documentation to this committee about all of the details on the deal to make that clear to Canadians, because at the end of the day, we're here on behalf of constituents and Canadians from all of our different regions to get to the bottom and get to the answers. The Prime Minister was supposed to be the guy in the room, or the guy in the room where things happen. He was supposed to be the negotiator on all of this. And we were wondering why it took Conservatives and a number of different stories, media stories, to have all of that pressure to have the agreement released. So we want to know just a simple question about why the Prime Minister didn't answer the question in the way that the agreement is spelled out. We certainly want to know the impact on the fiscal framework. I know that government members of this committee voted not so long ago on Canada's on budget they voted to spend a certain amount of money on a certain amount of programs, and this bridge and the cost of this bridge can now impact the fiscal framework to the tune of maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. We want to know where the 50% is going, and if it's going to the Ambassador Bridge, to the friends of the U.S. president for a fund, given that it is not going to Canadian workers and Canadian families and to repay the cost of the bridge. We want to hear from ministers involved in this negotiation. I think there's been a lack of transparency around that, on where Canada is. We'd like to hear from the Minister of U.S.-Canada trade negotiations, Minister LeBlanc. We'd like to have the Finance Minister to talk about that fiscal impact on this committee, and we think that Canadians deserve those answers. We want to hear from the Minister of Infrastructure, Minister Robertson, on the bridge, and certainly from officials from the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority to make it clear to Canadians and give them answers. But more than anything, I think what my colleagues brought forward in this motion is we want to know why the Prime Minister's answers don't match the reality of the deal. And the only way that we can know that is by having the deal presented in this committee. We want to know why he said the thing that he said. We know that he probably knew the details of the bill. The Prime Minister has billed himself as the guy to negotiate with the President, the guy who's in the room, the guy who understands economics.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
We
have
don't
a
know.
point of order. Right.
I'd just like to remind a member that all of the documents that she's talking about are actually public. They were made public. So
Thanks. It's not a point of order, but
thank you.
We'll continue. Thank you.
I'll certainly continue with the motion. I'm sure my colleague will have the opportunity to speak. We want to know why the Prime Minister told a number of different stories to Canadians. Why the story of what he told doesn't match the agreement in place. I think Canadians want to know that. I think there's been questions swirling around that for now weeks at a time, and that's exactly what this committee is here to do. It's exactly, Mr. Chair, what this meeting is here to do, and I hope that all members of Parliament and all members, including those on the government side, want to know those answers too. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Lewis and then Madame Gaudreau. Ms. McPherson, I do have your down on the speaking list. Was your hand up online for something else or just for the speaking order?
For the speaking order, thank you.
Perfect.
Chair.
If you could just take it down. We'll go down, sorry, to Mr. Lewis, please, and then Madame Gaudreau.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here at OGO today on this committee for this very, very important topic. Obviously, the Gordie Howe Bridge is about a kilometer and a half, maybe 2 kilometers from the very border of my riding with the great member from Windsor West. So it was important to come to Ottawa today to discuss this motion. Mr. Speaker, I just want to start off by congratulating and saying thank you to the 6,500 skilled trade workers that put blood, sweat, and tears into one of the most amazing bridges that I've certainly ever been on, and I just say thank you to them and congratulations. This is their celebration. It's all of Canada's, but it's certainly theirs. I got to visit that site 3 or 4 times over the last 6 or 7 years, and what they've done is really, really second to none. I was also there, Mr. Chair, last Friday for the opening of the bridge, so I just say thank you to all of those that made it happen. Chair, about, I don't know what it was, 8 or 10 days ago, I did an interview with a local radio station called AM 800. And one of the questions they asked me was, do you believe, MP Lewis, that we'll ever see the full deal? That Canadians will ever know the full deal? Now, this was before it was released by Bloomberg in the United States. And I said, I'm not so sure that it's going to be tabled before July 27th, at least not by the government. And they said, okay. I said, but I'm cautiously optimistic, but I do know for sure that our workers, our businesses, the nurses, the doctors that use our bridges to go over to the United States to work, to put food on their table, their family's table, that pay exorbitant amounts of tolls, want to know exactly where those tolls are going. So they want to know the transparency. They deserve to know the accountability. And quite frankly, it should have been tabled and they should have been told the absolute truth from the very get-go. I'm going to start, and I won't be overly long, Mr. Chair, but I just want to say one thing to my wife and daughter back home. Because we have four horses at home, and they ride horses basically every weekend competitively. And they both wear cowboy hats. And I just want to let them know that just because you wear a cowboy hat is not an excuse to not tell the exact honest truth. It's not an excuse to forget something. So I don't blame them. Mr. Chair, when I went across the border yesterday, I took the Gordie Howe Bridge. I took the tunnel over to Michigan. I had a meeting, and I brought the bridge back. And I was in awe. It was amazing. And when I got through customs, great security officer there, CBSA officer, and I paid my $8 toll with my debit card. And I was going down the 401 because it connects to the 401. On the way home, I got to thinking, where does that $8 go? Is the $8 going, because we understand that we're splitting, well, it was going to be profits, but now it's revenue from the tolls. So is the $8 going, we know 50% is going to the states, to Michigan specifically. We don't know what it's being used for. We don't know what the 50% of the remainder of the money is going to. One question I would ask, Mr. Chair, is any of that 50% going to the Ambassador Bridge? Surely will be in this agreement. Surely the 3 ministers and the bridge officials.
Chair, point of order.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
This is all public. The information's been public.
I'm going to interrupt you, sir. That's
And-
not
and-
not a point of order. You will have your chance to speak. I'll ask colleagues that we stick to procedural point of orders, or if there's a translation issue, so we can hear
Well,
everyone's.
there's clearly a translation issue.
Okay, thanks. Your hands up. Continue, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So certainly if we had Minister LeBlanc, Minister Robertson, or Minister Champagne here, they would be able to answer the questions of this committee. And so these are not unreasonable questions. They're actually very, very reasonable questions that my office is being inundated with, and rightly so. And how can I do my job effectively as the Member of Parliament for Essex and answer my constituents' questions if I don't have the answers? And so, Mr. Chair, there are a lot of questions, and I cannot fathom or even perceive as to why any member sitting around this table doesn't have constituents that have these same questions, that wouldn't want to call on the ministers to be totally transparent, totally accountable, and just give us answers to our questions so that we can be fully transparent and accountable to our own people. But again, Mr. Chair, I just want to reiterate, this is not about the fact that I'm upset about the Gordie Howe Bridge opening, because it's going to help the Essex-Windsor region and all of Canada greatly. It's about being true to our constituents and ensuring that we are doing the right thing by answering their questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Lewis. We'll go to Madame Gaudreau and then Mr. Gill. And just for those who are new to the committee, I'll always announce who's up and then who is next, but it's up to the members to get yourself on the speaking list. I won't remind you past that. Madame Gaudreau, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last week, I was with the National Defense Committee, and we went to observe what we have as equipment in terms of forecasting the results of the increasing costs, and we talked about NORAD, of course. So when this announcement was raised in the media, well, there were people who told me it's not happening in Quebec. Who paid for this? $6.4 billion. It is all Canadians, including Quebecers. So my question was the following. Can we get the clauses of the agreement? Because the media didn't contradict themselves, but it wasn't the same information. What's unfortunate, Mr. Chair, is that the Parliamentary Budget Officer won't necessarily need a request from the department or a committee to shed light on this. That's one thing. But how is it, with the time that's gone by until we're here today, we're told through points of order that the information is now available? Great. However, I have many questions. Are the clauses all descriptive? How will we repay that $6.4 billion? Is it in there? I don't know. I don't have it. It just came out. Is there an order of priority for the payments? Is there a guarantee to recoup the investment? Are tariffs all going into the American fund and we'll have to renegotiate? Okay. Well, you know how it goes. So all of that, we've received information. And if there hadn't been this 1064 and the motion on the table, well, I have a sneaking suspicion that we wouldn't have talked about it, that we wouldn't have been able to have more accurate information. So obviously this meeting, well, there are things that could be changed. I agree. But what's super important is that we ensure that the details of the agreement, parliamentarians, so that democracy can be aware. In order to respect taxpayers, those who funded this. They want to know. In Quebec, they're on vacation, but they'll be getting back to work soon, and I'm already being asked. As a parliamentarian, you must know. We don't want unfair negotiations. And I say, I don't have any more information than you do. It's as the Prime Minister makes it available. So currently it's been the media who've been providing information, but parliamentarians need to know. And now, I don't have the details of the agreement. I have many questions because once again, there are decisions that are made and we find out about them afterward once the announcement has been made. And thanks to the opposition, people will say you're always opposing, but that's democracy. It's ensuring that there's balance because the Government of Canada is not a private company. I'm an entrepreneur. With my private funds, I can do what I want to do. When I use public money, for example, the budget I have as an MP, well, seriously, it's totally different. And that's why we have guardrails, why we have a parliamentary budget officer, and I think it's essential that we shed light on this. How we can talk about that, but if it's because there's a majority government that it doesn't go forward, well, it will have shown that the opposition makes information become available, but are there things we're not allowed to know? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Gill, then will be Mr. Denko.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try and keep this pretty simple today because maybe I'm missing something. And if I am, I look forward to an explanation. The Prime Minister recently said Canada is in a stronger position today than we were a year and a half ago. Stronger how? Because I'm looking at the record and I'm having a little trouble getting there. So let's get through it slowly. The United States puts pressure on Canada over the digital sales service tax. Canada drops the tax. The same thing happened with Canada's retaliatory tariffs. All the elbows up rhetoric, poof, gone. Not the rhetoric, just the tariffs. The same thing happened with the so-called Netflix tax. There was pressure from the Americans, and we gave concession on that too. Not sure about you, Chair, but as a former cop, I see a pattern here. Then we get to the Gordie Howe Bridge in my riding of Windsor West. Now this one shouldn't be complicated. Canada paid for the bridge. Canada financed the bridge. Canada built the bridge. $6.4 billion. Our bridge, our money, our risk. Then the bridge gets finished and we are ready to open it. President Trump gets some inducements allegedly and is reported by some newspapers in the US from the owner of the Ambassador Bridge. And he says, nope, you're not opening the bridge anymore. And he wants compensation. So Canada goes back to the negotiating table. Apparently these were the technical issues the Prime Minister talked about when the bridge didn't open in June. And then after the negotiations or technical discussions, we come out with 15 years of payments equal to 50% of defined net revenues going into a US-controlled fund, along with new provisions around the tolls. Yet another concession, and I'm sure we all see the pattern of concessions. This is the part where I need some help. What did we get? The Americans apply pressure, we make concessions. What did they give us? And please don't tell me we got the bridge open. I'm happy the bridge is open. People in Windsor are happy that the bridge is open because they already paid $6.4 billion for the bridge. That's like buying a car from a neighbor who owns a dealership, paying cash for it, bringing it home, and then paying the neighbor every year because he finally agreed to give you the keys to the car. And then coming inside and yelling at your wife saying, hey, I got a great deal. Nope, you did not. You paid twice. So tell us, what did Trump originally want? We know he talked about half ownership. Canada didn't give him that. That is great. We will give credit where it's due. So what else did he want? How much revenue? For how long? What kind of control was he looking for over the bridge? What did Canada say no to or counter with? What did the Americans give up? And how did we end up with 50% for 15 years? These aren't trick questions, Chair. This is basic negotiating. What did they want? What did we want? What did they give up? What did we give up? And then we compare the two. That's it. Now let's follow the money. Canada spent $6.4 billion. How much are these 15 years of payments expected to cost? There has to be a number. You don't negotiate a 15-year financial agreement without doing the math. At least I hope you don't. So what's the number? And does this delay Canada recovering its investment? It probably does, and if yes, for how many years? 5, 10, 15 years or more? Canada borrowed the money. Canada carries the financing debt and the servicing cost for that debt. But when these new payments are calculated, Canada's financing costs aren't deducted the way the Prime Minister claimed they were going to be. So Canadians carry the debt, and somebody else gets the revenue before the debt is accounted for. Again, who negotiated that? Because if I lend you the money to build a store, and then you tell me somebody else gets a cut before what you're supposed to owe me, I might have a question or two for you. Then we get to the 2012 agreement. The new agreement says the old agreement stays in place. But then President Trump says the old agreement is basically null and void going forward on the day we had the ribbon cutting ceremony, no less. So who is right, the Prime Minister or Mr. Trump? And more importantly, what did Canada do? Did we call them? Did we write to them? Did we contact Michigan? Did we say, hold on, we have an agreement. We signed on this. Both did. Are we going to go again and renegotiate this now? Simple questions, Chair. We need answers for that. We need written assurances. And if we got written assurances, table them so that the committee can see, parliamentarians can see. If not, then why not? Because here's where I'm losing the plot. We made new concessions to get the bridge open, and then almost immediately we're debating whether the original agreement protecting Canada's investment is still secure. So what exactly did we settle? And this is where the bridge becomes a bigger part of the story. Digital tax, followed by pressure, and Canada backs off. Retaliatory tariffs, followed by pressure, we back off again. Netflix tax, pressure, we back off. Bridge, followed by pressure, and Canada backs off again. And now we are facing more tariff threats, and so I want to understand the strategy here. Maybe there is one. Explain it. Because right now it looks like this. Washington applies pressure, Ottawa caves. Ottawa announces that as being progress. Washington comes back with another demand. Ottawa makes another concession. And then the Prime Minister tells Canadians, we are stronger somehow. And I ask, stronger how? Fewer tariffs? No. More certainty? Not really. Better access to the U.S. market? Nope. More security for the auto sector? Nope. More investment? Sadly, no. A more secure CUSMA? You must be kidding. Just give me one of those things that I can bring back home and tell my people this is what we got, or this is what your Canadian government got for you. If there is a Canada that is stronger, I'd love to see that based on these strategies and arguments that are being given. What is the new strategy of this government if things don't change? Is there a plan B? President Trump hasn't exactly been subtle. You don't need binoculars to see him coming. He tells you what he wants. He applies pressure. He threatens tariffs. He waits. So why do we keep acting surprised when he does exactly what he told us he was going to do? It's like me during my policing career pulling somebody over for doing 140 in an 80 zone and hearing, officer, I didn't realize I was speeding. Sir, the odometer is right there. You should have looked at it for a change. At some point, you have to look at it and say, Canada has leverage. We have energy. We have critical minerals. We have steel, aluminum, autos, manufacturing. American factories depend on Canadian supply chains. American workers depend on this relationship too. So let's use it. Because right now, this government's negotiating posture reminds me of a cheap lawn chair. Looks sturdy sitting there, then somebody puts a little pressure on it, and it folds immediately. There goes another leg. And somehow, the press release the following day says, the chair is stronger than ever. Nope, it's lying in the grass, Chair. Maybe that's a bit unfair. Maybe our negotiators fought like hell behind closed doors. Maybe the Americans demanded 10 things and Canada stopped 9 of them. If that's what happened, tell us. I'll congratulate them personally and say good job. But that's exactly what this committee should find out. But if the members opposite shut the study down today, then I have another very simple question. Why? Yes, you have the votes. You can shut us down, but you can't shut down the facts. You can't make the tariffs disappear. You can't make concessions disappear. You can't make uncertainty disappear. And you certainly can't make President Trump disappear. Closing our eyes doesn't solve the problem. It's like the pigeon sitting on a tree, and as soon as he sees a cat, he closes his eyes and pretends the cat's disappeared because it cannot see it anymore. The pigeon may feel better, but the cat doesn't really care. It's going to have that pigeon for lunch. And that's really my concern. Are we going to be lunch? I don't want Canada fighting with the people of the United States. They're our neighbors. They're our friends. They're family. They're our biggest customer. I want this government to succeed with them. Let's face it, the Americans show up looking for American interests. We should go out there looking for our interests and for our workers and our families, not somebody else's. Our job is to look after our folks. Not after the first threat, not after the second concession, every single time, Chair. So let's make this very simple. Since this Prime Minister took office, what did Canada give up? What did America give up? And what did Canada get? And if we're really stronger today, just show us. That's all. Nothing to it. Walk us through it. And we'll be happy with that explanation. That's what I'm looking for, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll go to Mr. Danko and then Ms. DesRoches, please. Mr. Danko, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate this opportunity to talk about some really good news for Canada, which is, of course, the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge, bringing extremely significant economic uplift and new trade opportunities for Canada and for the United States. And of course, this bridge is not about toll revenue. It's never been about toll revenue. It's always been about building that partnership, that trade partnership between Canada and the U.S., and enabling cross-border trade. I think this the Windsor-Detroit crossing carries a third of all of the trade between Canada and the U.S. So this is a tremendous good news story for Canada and for the United States. As we're back in Ottawa, it's interesting to hear the opposition members pontificate about their opinions of what it took to get this bridge opening. The word pontificate is actually interesting because it refers to the pontiff, the Pope, who is named after the Roman root word, the Latin word for bridge. So obviously Rome is known for its roads, but the naming the Pope after the Latin word for bridge also speaks to the importance of bridges to the economic success of the Roman Empire. The members opposite talked about some of the questions that they have in the agreements. And, you know, just to state this again on the record, that both the original contract that was signed in 2012 is publicly available, and the new agreement in principle is also publicly available. The terms of those contracts are actually fairly simple and straightforward. They're spelled out publicly, published on the website for the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Just very briefly, I think the member opposite actually did a fairly good job of explaining the terms of those agreements, but very briefly, the original contract had a revenue profit sharing provision once the debt and the bridge was paid off, approximately in 50 years, 50% going to the U.S., 50% to Canada for toll profits. And the new agreement in principle simply adds a revenue sharing agreement with the U.S. for the first 15 years, where 50% of the net toll revenue, excluding the operating expenses, goes to the American fund. So the terms of those contracts, publicly available, fairly straightforward. I was watching the construction of this bridge, which began in 2018, as a civil engineer, a structural engineer, in particular being a bridge design engineer. It was a really interesting project to watch the construction of. This is truly a global mega project. It's the size, the significance, and the importance to the Canadian and the American economy make it on a global scale one of those mega projects. And to have that built in our own backyard and to see the construction, it was really special. And from a professional standpoint, gratifying to see the technical expertise and all of the work that went into building a global landmark. I think in total, there was almost 16,000 individuals, a very strong union workforce that built this bridge. I believe it took over 20 million hours of construction to build and used 75% Canadian steel. So just the construction phase alone was a significant economic impact for Canada. And also noting that it started construction in 2018 and carried through over COVID. And it was a really important economic driver and work opportunity for Canadians during the COVID crisis, because work carried on making sure that this project was built and completed. I just have a few quotes to share from statements that have been made from Premier Doug Ford, from the Governor of Michigan, and from the Laborers International Union of North America Vice President Joe Mancinelli. So maybe I'll just start with Premier Ford, because he's been extremely supportive and connected with the construction of this bridge and what it means to Ontario and to Canada. So Premier Ford, on the opening of the structure on Monday, July 27th, said, quote, "In my opinion, the Prime Minister did an excellent job getting this deal done. This agreement will allow approximately $300 billion worth of goods to move across the border, creating more opportunities and more jobs. Michigan is Ontario's #1 trading partner, and it's critical for auto manufacturers and all manufacturers and the manufacturing sector. He, referring to the Prime Minister, did an incredible job." If I move on to the Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, on opening day, just last week, she said, "I'm proud to celebrate the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Built by skilled workers on both sides of the Detroit River, this bridge is an engineering marvel. It's also a symbol of the partnership that has defined Michigan and Canada for generations and all the things that we can accomplish together." And then finally, I'll share a statement that Joe Mancinelli, the International Vice President of the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, posted about the construction of the Gordie Howe International Bridge and the significant role that his members had in building this landmark structure. He said, quote, "I'm so proud of the skill and perseverance of LIUNA members and workers across the skilled trades who played in this transformative build, including our contractor partners and engineers. Truly impressive. Brothers and sisters, we built that." So again, Mr. Chair, as a structural engineer, our Ontario caucus actually visited the bridge before it was open last summer. And it is an amazing structure. I hope all Canadians have an opportunity to travel across this corridor. I am genuinely excited as a member from Hamilton, Canada's industrial center, the positive impact that this will have on trade across the country, but in particularly in those manufacturing centers in Ontario, Hamilton being Canada's steel town as well. And as an engineer, when you get to look at a structure that you had a part in building, or have that pride in a job well done, I'm just so happy for all the members of LIUNA and the workforce that had an opportunity to work on this structure. I hope they all get a chance to travel over and see what it is that they've done. And as Joe Mancinelli said, have that awe to say we built that. And I think as Canadians, we can all share that sense of pride that we built that. So with that, that's the end of my remarks. And if you can add me to the speaking list for a second time. Thank you.
We have Ms. Desroches and then Ms. Rochefort.
Merci.
Welcome, Tolga. Sorry, the floor is yours.
Ça va? Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our colleagues for having called this meeting, this important meeting. It's important for us to discuss everything the opposition has raised, so it's welcome. I'd just like to begin by correcting a few facts. First, I know it was raised in the points of order, Mr. Chair, but the agreement in principle, well, the initial agreement of 2012 has been public for a long time, and the agreement in principle was published on July 22nd, a week ago. So it was published. It's accessible to anyone. It's available to our colleagues, to the research bureaus of the opposition. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's ironic, in fact, that colleagues are saying that the Prime Minister is trying to mislead Canadians when, since the beginning of this meeting, colleagues are talking about toll revenue when they know we're talking about net revenue. We know they've done their homework. And so here we're talking about toll revenue after operating costs have been subtracted. The Prime Minister was very clear about that. We're talking about operating costs, insurance, snow removal, etc. So that's the second thing I want to correct. I want us to ensure that we know what we're talking about. We're not talking about all of the revenue that the Bridge Authority will collect. This is after subtracting all of the operating costs. And the other thing I wanted to add, the third point I wanted to correct, Mr. Chair, is that I'm a little offended by the insinuations by my colleagues that the Prime Minister has tried to mislead Canadians on purpose. I'm not finding a better term. So the Prime Minister was very clear. He clarified his remarks. What hasn't changed in any discussion is the 2012 agreement that was signed by, may I speak, please? I gave you my attention and respect, so please give me the same thing. That would be much appreciated. So half of the revenue will go to the development, the Regional Development Fund for 15 years. I won't come back on that. But the agreement signed in 2012 has not changed. That's important to note, because after 15 years, so that agreement continues. There's no change to it. The bridge belongs to the Government of Canada and Michigan, and the agreement in principle means that there will be funds that will be put into an economic development fund for trade development between Canada and the Detroit area. Those are important elements to understand. The bridge was opened 2 days ago. In the first 12 hours, this is important as well, colleagues talked about understanding the impact on the fiscal framework. In the first 12 hours, 7,000 vehicles crossed. In the first 12 hours, that's a lot. And what the fund will allow, it will allow for investments in initiatives to encourage and grow traffic between the two sides. And my colleague referred to this, the vitality of that trade corridor, the importance for the members opposite and on our side from that area. $70 billion, or 70% of trade goes through that corridor. $300 billion. Currently, the Ambassador Bridge has the traffic, and it needed to be modernized. Now we have modern facilities that will allow us to have much faster processing of trucks going through the region, and to have more secure facilities that will be able to detect illegal transportation of illegal goods, rather. So that's also important to note.
We very rightly so talked about the marvel of this piece of engineering and all of the work of the workers that contributed to this, and how that contributed to our economies during the year of construction. I think what's interesting here is we're hearing from the other side about continued criticism of the government's action. However, what I have not heard is what we would have done differently given this context. For how long would you have been willing to keep this bridge unopened? 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, right? And with the colleagues through the chair.
Sorry, we have a point of order.
Yes, relevance. She has not spoken to the motion. I've been patiently waiting for her to address the motion itself. Instead, she seems to be shadowboxing someone else.
Thank you, Mr. Albus. We always allow wide latitude for that, but perhaps we can get to the motion itself.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, pour la latitude.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the latitude.
This was the best course of action for taxpayers in the current context, and the agreement in principle, as the members can see, and I know the motion is calling, we're going back to the motion, it's calling to see all the clauses. It's been in the public since July 22nd, so again, I invite my colleagues to go online and read that. And it does also explicitly preserve the 2012 crossing agreement between Canada and the state of Michigan, who are the two joint owners of the bridge. And as we expect the net revenue to be modest or even negative at the beginning, this is a good news story. And even a good news story, my colleagues are incapable of cheering for Canada. And that is pitiful. That is very sad. Instead, we're going to go on a wild goose chase to try and create a story that paints us as not having Canadians back. And more importantly, and I'll get to my bottom line, and then I'll let my colleague take the floor, but the full cost of the bridge will be recouped. And the sooner we open the bridge, the sooner we can start recouping those dollar amount. The opening of the bridge provides certainty for thousands of SMEs who are relying on an additional trade corridor, who want, in this very uncertain times, in these very uncertain economic times, they want certainty. I'm sure you have businesses in your writings, right? And I'm sure we do. We hear it all the time, right? We can deal with what we know. We can deal with the tariff. It's hard, but we can deal with them. But we need certainty. And this provides that certainty. So again, I'm asking, what would they have done differently? What are they putting on the table? How long would they be willing to not provide that certainty to the Canadian SMEs that rely on this? So with that, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speak to this issue today. I must share with you that when I was on holidays and when I first learned of the 2026 agreement in principle, I will admit that I was confused, and I can therefore appreciate why there has been misunderstanding. But for me, the confusion disappeared completely once I recognized that there were two separate agreements that worked together. The first agreement, the 2012 Canada-Michigan Crossing Agreement, which remains fully in force. And I think that's an important point that's been made that deserves to be repeated. It established that agreement back in 2012, the ownership, the governance, and the financial framework for the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Under that agreement, Canada collects the toll revenues and applies them to the operation of the bridge and the repayment of Canada's approximately $6.4 billion investment. Once Canada's investment has been fully recovered, the agreement specifies that net operating revenues will be shared equally between Canada and the state of Michigan. In other words, the concept of sharing future revenues, net revenues, is not new. It has been part of the project's financial framework from the very beginning. The second agreement, of course, is the 2026 agreement in principle, and rather than replacing the 2012 agreement, it builds upon it. In fact, it explicitly states that nothing in the agreement in principle amends, modifies, or supersedes the 2012 Canada-Michigan crossing agreement. Instead, it commits both governments to develop the arrangements necessary to implement new commitments, including the establishment of the United States-Canada Economic Development Fund. So read together, and that I think is our job as parliamentarians, is to look at all of the various documents. Read together, these two documents tell us two things. First, the 2012 agreement remains the legal foundation of the project. And second, the implementation arrangements of the 2026 agreement in principle must be consistent with that existing framework. With that context, I would like to just touch briefly, Mr. President, on 3 points. First, why the bridge was necessary. I think it's necessary to just touch back on that, why that decision has proven to be the right one. And the point that I would really like to make today in my remarks is, why does the agreement in principle strengthen and not weaken the original vision for this project? And so quickly, the bridge, I think we've touched upon some of the points, why it was necessary. And basically, it was about preparing us for the future. Governments, basically in Canada and also in Michigan, Detroit, recognized that one of Canada's most important trade gateways could no longer depend on a single international crossing. The question was straightforward. What happens if there's disruptions, whether by an accident, severe weather, infrastructure failure, and the list goes on? And these threats remain today. And actually, all the more reasons why we should open, we did the right thing by opening the bridge as quickly as we could. Windsor and some of my colleagues live in that community and in the surrounding communities. Windsor needed a different route, one that did not bring increased trucking and vehicle activity through its city streets, one with direct freeway connections, modern custom facilities, greater capacity, and public ownership designed to serve Canada's long-term interests. And looking back today, I mean, this was 15 years ago that agreement was drafted. You know, I mean, and that's a long time. But that decision has proven remarkably forward-looking. When governments approved this project, few could have anticipated the changes that have taken place over the last few years. COVID-19 exposed the fragility of global supply chains. Geopolitical instability has reinforced the importance of economic security. And today, there's countries around the world that are investing in resilient supply chains, advanced manufacturing, and so on, as we are doing here in Canada. And that is precisely where the Gordie Howe International Bridge fits. It protects Canadian jobs. It strengthens our Canadian manufacturing sector. It supports our exporters. It improves the resilience of our supply chains. And it enhances
I'm sorry, Ms. Rushford. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. This point of order. Mr. Elbas?
Again, Mr. Chair, relevance. I am trying to hear what the members are saying and give them some latitude, but we're not actually hearing about the motion. All they're doing is just advertising the government's talking points on the bridge. It'd be nice if we actually heard what they thought about things like democracy and transparency in the parliamentary budget officer.
It's a valid point, Mr. Elbas. If we can get to the motion.
To my main point, I'm coming to it actually.
Thank you.
And so basically, overall, Canada built this bridge because it advances Canada's national interests. And the fact that it also strengthens one of the world's closest economic partnerships is an added benefit, not the primary purpose. And staying closed was not and is not an option. And this brings me to the agreement in principle. From the very beginning, the Gordie Howe International Bridge was intended to be more than a construction corridor. Governments understood that while the bridge would create economic benefits across North America, the communities of Windsor, Detroit, and their surrounding communities would experience the greatest impacts and therefore deserved to share directly in its success. And as my colleague Jean-Paul Danco mentioned, last summer I did have the opportunity to visit the bridge, but also the surrounding communities, and to see the impact of the bridge's feet in that community, the connection to the 401, and how the bridge has such significant impact on the community. I was pleased to learn then that the concern for local communities had given rise to a community benefits plan and a local community group, ensuring that local residents, Indigenous communities, businesses, and community organizations had a voice in shaping the project's legacy. In my view, what Canada has agreed to in the agreement in principle builds directly on that original commitment. It recognizes that things are no longer as they were in 2012. We can now see and feel the impact of the bridge on those affected communities. It addresses what could not have been seen
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
In 2012.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you, Ms. Rochford. There's a point of order.
I'm just wondering if there's anything in the members' notes about relevant to the motion.
Yes, I'm coming to that, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
I really
Thank you.
have to get you to the motion itself. We have a lot of other people who wish to speak on the motion,
Yes.
so I need to direct you to the motion. Thanks.
And so basically my final remarks. And so the United States Canada Economic Development Fund is not a departure from the original vision. It is its natural evolution. It takes the philosophy behind the community benefits plan and provides it with a long-term economic framework. In doing so, it helps ensure that the success of this bridge is measured not only by the goods that cross it, but also by the opportunities it creates for the communities that host it. The original agreement, Mr. President, built a world-class bridge. This agreement in principle builds world-class communities around it. Canadians expect us to stand up for Canadian interests, and that is also those that live in those communities near the bridge. They also expect us to work constructively with our partners when doing so advances those interests, and those objectives are not mutually exclusive. The Gordie Howe International Bridge proves that. The agreement in principle builds upon that success. It strengthens an already successful nation-building project by ensuring that the communities at its heart share in its long-term prosperity. And for me, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, that's a very important concept. And that for all those reasons that I support the agreement in principle, and I do not support the motion that's being presented today. Thank you very much.
Thanks. We've had a few people added to the speaking list. So before we get to Mr. Gasparo, I'm just going to update. We have Mr. Gasparo, then Ms. Lalonde, Ms. McPherson, back to Ms. Landsman, Mr. Danko, Madame Gaudreau, and then back to Ms. Desrochers. Mr. Gasparo, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm against this motion for many reasons, which I'll get into. The primary reason is the motion fails to discuss the significant economic benefit to Windsor, the province of Ontario, and the country more broadly. The fact of the matter is, Canada and the United States have the largest trading relationship in the world. Approximately $1.3 trillion in goods and services cross our border every year. The Windsor-Detroit Gateway is the busiest commercial land border crossing between Canada and the United States, carrying approximately 30% of all Canada-US trade. The corridor is one of North America's most critical trade routes and is essential to continental supply chains. The Gordie Howe International Bridge will improve the movement of people, goods, and services by providing additional border capacity, a new crossing alternative, modern border processing capabilities, and for the first time, a direct highway-to-highway connection. For Canadians who live in Windsor, know full well that those who travel across the Ambassador Bridge have to travel through residential areas, impacting hundreds of residents every single day. The bridge will improve reliability of cross-border supply chains, particularly for the automotive and advanced manufacturing sectors, where goods and components may cross the border multiple times during production. Reliable border crossings, as we all know, are critical for just-in-time manufacturing, where delays can disrupt production, increase costs, and put Canadian jobs at risk. What's interesting, Chair, is that Conservative Premier Doug Ford supports our government's decisive action to open this bridge. Clearly, he knows what the Conservative opposition does not, that total trade between Ontario and Michigan was valued at $81 billion back in 2022 and is critical for Ontario's
Mr. Chair, point of order.
economy.
Sorry, Mr. Gasparo, I have to interrupt
I'm
you for a
wondering
point of
now
order.
if that member's prepared notes have anything to do with the motion, because I think we've heard a lot of this, but nothing yet on the motion.
Like before, we allow wide latitude, but if you can get to the motion, please.
Sure. Well, if the honorable member was paying attention and not playing on her phone, she would have heard that I led off with why I'm not.
I'm going to interrupt
why
you
I'm
there,
not supporting the
colleagues.
motion.
I'm going to interrupt you there. Colleagues all around, I just ask that we keep it to the motion and away from everyone from such comments. Back to you, Mr. Gasparo, please.
Getting back to why I do not support this motion in regards to the continued economic, why the motion does not address the broader economic benefits to our country. The bridge itself is estimated to contribute approximately $1.3 billion to Windsor's contribution to our country's gross domestic product. Approximately 75% of the project steel was sourced from Canada,
Point of
and
order.
25%.
I'm sorry.
That was me.
Oh,
Mr.
sorry.
Chair.
I'm trying to see. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Gasparo. Ms. McPherson, go ahead on your point of order.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do have to agree with some of my colleagues that none of these interventions seem to be addressing the motion. We all agree that the Gordie Howe Bridge must be open. We all agree of its importance. We all know the facts of the workers and how much steel came from Canada. However, we are discussing the motion. And this appears to me to be an attempt to filibuster and not actually discuss the motion. So I would like the member to return to the motion we are debating today, please.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. This is going to be one of those times when myself and Ms. McPherson actually agree 100%. If we can get to the motion, please.
Sure. So I am speaking to the motion and why I do not support it, Chair. And because of the failure for the motion to address the broader economic impacts to our country. And as I was saying, 75% of the project steel was sourced from Canada and with 25% coming from the United States. We had more than 455 co-op students who got experience from the building of this bridge, right from Ontario universities. And we had members of the Ironworkers Union, LEUNA, others who benefited from opening this bridge. So I am confused that the Conservative opposition is trying to celebrate the opening of the bridge, yet critiquing the opening of the bridge at the same time. So to conclude, Chair, I do not support this motion. It does not address the broader economic benefits this bridge has, and I look forward to being added back onto the speakers list. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparo. Ms. Lalonde, welcome to Ogo. I don't think you've been with us before. Welcome.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Non, effectivement, c'est
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is my first time here, and I would encourage all of my colleagues to put their earpiece on because I'll be speaking French. Listen, I'm very proud to represent the most beautiful riding in Canada, Orleans. So I'd like to welcome you back to Ottawa, and I hope my colleagues are having a good summer, especially you, Mr. Chair. You're here with us today. I would like to echo what my opposition colleagues said regarding the exemplary work, the contribution of the workers over several years. So we have a bridge, as my colleague said, with engineering. I'm not an engineer by trade, but it's extraordinary. I had the pleasure of going last year as well, and I was proud to know that some of my colleagues, like Mr. Gill and Mr. Lewis, they were there for the opening of the bridge in recent days. So it's important for me to thank those workers. And I know my colleague mentioned this in English regarding the quotes provided by the Ontario Trucking Association, Eric Lombardi, the Premier of Ontario, regarding the fact that the bridge is open. And what I'm not hearing at all from the opposition is how long would they have kept the bridge closed? I think that's very important as well. The motion talks, I'll read it because my colleagues seem a little sensitive to the fact that we might not be addressing the motion directly, but the motion talks about transparency. It's transparent. The agreement has been made public. I believe it was on July 22nd. It was made public. Everyone, Canadians, taxpayers can look at it. The people of Orleans can read the agreement. What's also very important, Mr. Chair, when we talk about honesty and openness, well, the bridge is open. That's an important thing. I think we all agree that it's important for the economy between Michigan and Ontario. I'm a proud Franco-Ontarian. So trade is very important. I am a former businesswoman as well. But what's even more important in all of this is the agreement that was signed in 2012, and I'll say it because the Conservatives like to hear it. Mr. Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister of Canada, signed it, and it remains in effect. And so the 2012 agreement continues. There's no change to it. There's a parallel agreement, and I know that some of my colleagues suggest or mention the Prime Minister. Listen, I listened to a press conference, I think it was from July 26th, where he talked once again with transparency and humility, and he said that in his initial remarks, maybe he should have been more specific. And that's exactly what he shared with all Canadians regarding the parallel 2026 agreement that is in effect for the next years, which will also create a fund, a strategic investment fund for economic investments for the region between Michigan and Ontario. This is a fund that will help the local economy. I was looking at my notes, Mr. Chair, and I don't want to give too many numbers because it's not always the most important. But there are members from Windsor here. The project will contribute $1.3 billion to Windsor's GDP. Just Windsor. The fact that the bridge has been opened. Over 7,000 vehicles have already crossed the bridge. Oh, that was in the first 12 hours. Thank you, Caroline. So we're here for a motion, a very important motion. We don't neglect the parliamentary importance of our role on committees. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, it's my first time at OGO, so I don't have notes ready, but I have a lot of information. And one thing that hasn't been raised regarding this bridge that's now open, and this might be of interest to the Conservatives. So on that point, when I visited the bridge last year, one of the reasons, yes, supply chains, transportation, but also border security. That's something we all need to remember because the inspection facilities are modern and there's new technology, and that will strengthen capacity to detect illegal goods, contraband, and persons who are not authorized, and there will be more efficient transportation of legitimate people and goods. So, Mr. Chair, I haven't heard any mention of how long the Conservatives would have kept the bridge closed. We were practical and pragmatic. We signed an agreement, a bilateral agreement between Canada and the United States to create an economic fund for the region, which is in the advantage of small businesses, local people. The fact that it's open, well, small businesses will benefit. The auto sector, manufacturers, everybody will benefit. So the bridge is open. Nevertheless, for some, the bilateral agreement was made public after it was signed. Well, I was a businesswoman, Mr. Chair, and I never negotiated publicly. I would negotiate, and then the agreement would become public, unless the Conservatives have a different idea of how negotiations happen. Negotiations happen at a negotiating table, and then once it's done, it's made public. And there are also projections regarding what will be contributed. I was a businesswoman, and when I opened my retirement homes, my budget projections were often over 3 or 4 years until I could see a return on my investment. So yes, it's very important to be transparent, but that's why the agreement is public. And once again, what I would like to know is, how long would the Conservatives have kept that bridge closed to the detriment of a very important economy, not only for the municipality of Windsor, for Ontario, but for Canada? So on that, I don't want to go on for too long, but I wanted to make a point because I wanted to talk about security, trade, and the fact that this motion talks about, and I'll read it, because when we talk about transparency, well, transparency after signing is about what is made public after an agreement is signed, and it's been done. The bridge is open. I know some of my colleagues were there. I wish I could have been there as well to see the opening. It's historic. It's an extraordinary bridge. So on that, Mr. Chair, I thank you for having given me the floor, and I'll let other colleagues speak to the motion and also to the fact that the bridge is open.
Thanks. We'll go to virtually to Ms. McPherson and then back to Ms. Landsman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I will take a few moments just to speak to this motion that has been brought forward by my colleague, Mr. Albus. But I do want to start by saying, of course, all of us understand the importance of the Gordie Howe Bridge. All of us in this room know how important it is that this bridge opened. Absolutely, we do. And I want to congratulate all of the workers that built this bridge over the last number of years. What an incredible accomplishment! What an incredible testament to the workers in this country. And of course, I've got to give a shout out to my colleague Brian Massey, who was the member of Parliament who pushed so hard for so long to make sure that this bridge got built. But what we're talking about with this motion is getting the clarity that we require when we as Canadians, as parliamentarians, as opposition members, received information from the Prime Minister that misled the media, that misled Canadians, that was deeply unclear, where people didn't have a good understanding of what the negotiations looked like, what the agreement was. So yes, we all absolutely want to see this bridge open. Every single person, I honestly believe every parliamentarian recognizes the value of this bridge. But Canadians deserve answers. They deserve to know why the Prime Minister misled the media and misled
Point of order, Chair.
I don't think there was misleading.
The member
Sorry.
is assigning motive to the Prime Minister. It's unparliamentary.
That's not a point of order, Mr. Danko. Just all of us be careful, but please go ahead, Ms. McPherson.
Thank you very much. You know, it's actually at the fact that the Prime Minister gave the wrong information and said it was because he had a cowboy hat on. And as an Albertan, I spend an awful lot of time every year at Stampede. And I hope that the hat on my head does not influence my ability to share information accurately. But I think as well, Canadians look at what we are seeing right now and they see another appeasement by this Prime Minister. I will agree with my colleague from Windsor West, who brought up a number of appeasements that this Prime Minister has already done. And it would be one thing if we were giving up the digital sales tax or digital service tax. It would be one thing if we were giving up the retaliatory tariffs. Or even today, you know, the news coming out that we are now allowing the web giants to get off.
Point of order.
Their fair share. But
Sorry, I have to interrupt you, Ms. McPherson.
I do not like to interrupt, and I thank all members who are allowing me, but I did speak on the motion. Ms. McPherson, I don't think is speaking on the motion. Merci.
Well, we've so far allowed a very wide latitude on the debate, and like everyone else, I will ask you to get to the motion, Ms. McPherson.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. And I certainly hope I'm not getting under anyone's skin when I bring up the idea that this does look like an appeasement. So we do have an obligation as opposition members to get to the bottom of how this negotiation happened, what is in the deal. You know, how do we believe if we've got on one hand the Prime Minister telling us something that was clearly not true, and now telling us something else? How do we know which of those things we can move forward on? So I think that this is a very reasonable motion to ask for clarity. And what I would ask my Liberal colleagues is, if you are so proud of this deal, if you are so proud of the work that the Prime Minister and our ministers have done in negotiating this deal, then why would you not want an opportunity for the ministers to share that information with Canadians through this committee, through this motion? It seems to me that that is a reasonable thing. If you do believe that this is such a good news story, as I've heard you say, I would think you would want the idea of bringing forward ministers so that they could share your good news story. This seems to me, when we have Liberal members of Parliament, members of this committee, not even trying to amend the motion, but simply disagreeing with the motion in its entirety, that means to me that you don't want to be held accountable on this agreement. And that's a problem, because Canadians they want to know the details. They deserve to know the details. The confusion that was sowed by the Prime Minister already needs to be clarified. In fact, I'm curious why my colleague, Mr. Albus, didn't include the Prime Minister in witnesses for this testimony. It would have been nice to hear from him on perhaps the time where he didn't have a cowboy hat on. This is a pattern with this government. You know, this is a pattern we have seen. The lack of transparency, the lack of clarity, misinformation or disinformation coming from different ministers and the Prime Minister. The idea that an issue as big as this, as important as this is to our economy, we need to have the ability to ask ministers questions about it, to get to the bottom of it, to get some clarity on how this deal was struck, what Canadians are benefiting from, and what Canadians are paying. This is the motion. And so for my part, New Democrats would support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. We'll now go to Ms. Lanceman. And after Ms. Lanceman, we're back to Mr. Denko.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to speak to the motion, and I'm going to suggest that the reason that you hear filibustering about the bridge, which of course we all agree the opening is a good thing, is because they don't want to actually talk about the motion. So let's get back right into the motion, because it's a good motion about governance and about what Canadians deserve to know. We ask a few questions, and I'll go through them. What's included in the agreement refers to, quote, all incurred operating costs of the bridge. The problem is the agreement never defines this. Whether it's public or not, it is deliberately left vague. That's what we're asking. Reporters pushed officials on this. And the closest thing to a definition we got was the Prime Minister's office describing things like toll booths or maintenance or snow remover, but we don't actually know. And that's exactly why we've brought this committee forward. Most notably, the new text of the motion doesn't define operating costs. It doesn't mention Canada's debt, which is the crux of all of these outstanding questions that Canadians want answers to. He's implied debt repayment comes off the top before any split, but the text doesn't say that either. And that's why the question about governance is the first question that we have in the motion. I know that the members opposite have referred to this being a public document, and I hope that they've read it so they can follow along. Let's go to Clause 2, a question about Clause 2 about what objects, quote, objects mean of the Canada-U.S. Economic Development Fund. There is nothing specific in it. It is a placeholder. The clause just says that Canada and the U.S. will, quote, reasonably agree on the fund's objects later. That's with only that being that they must benefit the United States and Canada-U.S. trade. So that's as clear as mud, which is exactly why we use Parliament and this committee to get to the bottom of this with officials. We'll go to the third piece. It's Clause 3. As per Clause 3A, what, quote, comparable regional crossings will be used to determine whether toll rates are above average of such crossings. The agreement doesn't name them. That's the problem. That's what we want to hear from officials, from ministers, from those who were responsible for negotiating this agreement. This is, it's just a phrase in the agreement. Average comparable regional crossings. It's a benchmark without listing the crossings count. The obvious competitors in my colleague's neighborhood of Windsor-Detroit crossings is the Ambassador Bridge, obviously, and the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel. And since the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority has set the toll rates for cars and commercial vehicles, since those are below the privately owned competitor, which is the Ambassador Bridge, which we now know are friends of President Trump, they're charging $8 for personal vehicles versus $14 on the Ambassador Bridge. But comparable isn't fully defined. So that's a built-in point for future disagreement. That's exactly what we want officials to answer. And none of this has been answered by any of the government members on this committee. We'll go to another question on governments. How will dispute resolution proceed if there is a disagreement about these toll charges? There isn't really a dispute resolution in this process. It's a consent and clock mechanism that's worked in. So when Canada proposes a toll of an increase over 10%, that pushes it above the regional average, or a decrease pushes it down below it. If the U.S. gets a 30-day window to consent or object and Washington says nothing, then the consent is automatically given. But the text of the actual agreement, which we want officials to speak to, doesn't actually talk about what happens if the U.S. objects. There's no arbitrator, there's no path to dispute resolution, and despite that agreement all being public, none of this is on the record. These are all questions that have been asked to departments, to the government. There are no answers to these questions, so we're using our parliamentary committee to get to the bottom of this. Finally, as per Clause 5, notwithstanding the details that remain to be finalized, what specifics have been agreed to regarding the repayments, the timing, the calculation methods, the auditing, the reporting, the enforcement, the dispute settlement. Those are all questions that Canadians have for about this deal. This is the most revealing clause, actually, Clause 5. It says in full that officials will develop and finalize the legal, the financial, the administrative arrangements necessary to implement the agreement. And we want to hear from those officials about what that implementation looks like as expeditiously as possible. That's the entire clause. Payments, timing, calculations, methods, those are not specified in the agreement yet, despite the agreement being public, as you have said so many times in your talking points. Only the 15-year headline split is set, and the mechanisms are all TBD. So that's what Canadians have questions about. What are these mechanisms? Auditing and reporting, those are not addressed at all in the agreement. agreement. Enforcement, that's not addressed at all in the agreement. Dispute settlement is not addressed beyond the toll consent clause that I just spoke about in clause 3. All of these questions still remain. This reads like a term sheet, and the Prime Minister would understand the difference. It's not a finished contract. And what Canadians deserve to know with a $6.4 billion investment of their tax money that hasn't been accounted for in the fiscal framework at all is what all this means. When does it happen? And when the Prime Minister is asked, and he repeatedly misleads the Canadian public, that's why this committee is important. That's why it's important to hear from officials. Perhaps they are not officials on the other side who were part of the negotiating team. In fact, I'm certain that they are not. Perhaps they are not officials on the other side that understand the intricacies of this agreement. And perhaps Canadians have a whole lot more questions after their testimony, after their interjections into this committee than when they started. We all know that the bridge is good for the economy. Yep. So with that, I will give you that. I'm going to amend the motion to give the Liberals everything that they wanted and that they've asked for here in this committee. I want to amend that the motion adds after the Bridge Authority the following line. If you want to talk about the economy and fully understand it, I'm going to amend it to have point E. Additional witnesses will help the committee fully understand the economic impact of the deal, including from impacted businesses and workers. And I think that should take care of all of the talking points that you've put forward on the table. And we can answer the last 5 questions that I've asked that haven't been answered by anybody representing the government on this committee. Questions that I think the Canadians want to know, and questions that are still outstanding after continued misleading statements by the Prime Minister.
Hear, hear. Thanks. Do you have that amendment in writing that you can send to the clerk or read it back in slowly for the analysts, unless you caught it? Well, let's hear the amendment first, and then we can suspend for a couple seconds.
So that the motion be amended.
So we're adding like E.
Yeah, so the motion be amended after the words Bridge Authority with the following. E, additional witnesses that will help the committee fully understand the economic impact of the deal, including from impacted businesses and workers. And I think with that, you can probably support the motion.
Okay, so we're going to be on the amendment. I'll start a speaking list on the amendment. I had Ms. Goodrow first for the amendment. Mr. Danko, Mr. Elbes, Mr. Roche,
Mr. Lewis.
And then Mr. Lewis. Do we still need to actually suspend because it's a simple one line? Yeah. Can we make it 1 minute? Suspend it quickly for 1 minute. are back in session. Now we are on the amendment. Speaking order is Madame Gaudreau and then to Mr. Danko. Madame Gaudreau, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président. Alors,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the outset, at the beginning of my comments an hour and a half ago, it was really about the principle. I still agree with the principle. Of course, I've learned, even though I already read it since July 22nd, that the agreement in principle was public. So I've had an hour, Mr. Chair. I wasn't listening closely to the comments, but I worked hard to break down the agreement. And my question is, it's totally normal to want to shed light on this, because I also have questions that I'm persuaded my colleagues won't be able to answer. For example, point 1, payments that would be 50% of net revenue. That's okay, we've understood that. For the first 15 fiscal years, less. So there was a contradiction in what was said. That's one thing. Now, what is the information available today? It is not enough because, yes, Clause 1 is specific. It's the first 15 years, but it doesn't define net revenue without reference to capital. And it puts it outside of the 2012 framework. When we're told that the 2012 agreement is intact, I'll continue a little. That's not what I see. In my reading, the payments are for 15 years. That's okay. We've understood that. There's another interpretation here that's legally possible. It needs to be confirmed by implementation instruments. And for risk management, the management of public money, we need to have information on the tools. So, for example, the specific date of the first payment to the American Fund, when would that be? What would be that date? We don't know. Repaying the Canadian contributions, is that a deduction in calculating the net revenue? Why does Clause 1 not mention that what was publicly announced by the Prime Minister regarding the full repayment of the debt? Will payments be done through the WDBA or through the Federal Treasury? I have many questions. And if the Americans refuse an increase, does it have to be motivated and reasonable? When you look at the agreement, there are 4 major problems. I've done a very brief analysis over the last hour. So there's a possible gap between what the Prime Minister said and the text published. So we'd like to know. That's totally legitimate. A possible economic breach to refunding the Canadian taxpayers as set out in 2012. The granting in 3 to the United States of a power or to consent to some toll decisions. Oof. I think we need to know that. And the last one, what are the legal instruments we heard from my colleague earlier, and financial instruments that need to be defined to measure the real cost? All of that, Mr. Chair. Well, we need to meet on this and talk about it. Now, this motion, there was an amendment, and that's what we're discussing. But I want to go further. If we can find an agreement to shed light on this for our people, I think we could do this in the summer. And Mr. Chair, in July 2020, I was here in Parliament, and I'm able to sit throughout the summer. But I'm very aware that we can plan, we can give the government time to do all of its diligence, and we can have accountability, and the parliamentary budget officer will be able to provide information, and the ministers in question will be able to appear as well. So that's my proposal. It could be win-win for everyone, because otherwise, Mr. Chair, in 3 minutes, we're going to close up and go home, and neither the opposition will have information and the government would be hiding because they don't have all of the answers. Negotiations happen very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Gaudreau. We do have resources till about 4 p.m., so we won't disappear quite so fast. Mr. Danko, and then it goes over to Mr. Elbis. Mr. Danko on the amendment, please.
Thank you, Chair. And noting that you made the trip in from Edmonton for this meeting to Ottawa, so it's very appreciated that that you did that. And I do appreciate the discussion this afternoon. Noting that the sitting members of the Government Operations and Estimates Committee from the opposition aren't present. That there are alternatives filling in today. We just had the former member from Carleton grace us with his presence. I guess there's nothing important going on in Battle River Crowfoot during this summer when we're spending time in our constituencies. So interesting that that he was here for this meeting, which I mean, a lot of this is politics, and I understand that. But if we're talking about the amendment that's on the table,
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Colleagues, Mr. Danko has the floor, please.
So if we're talking about the amendment that's on the table, the impacts of the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge on impacted businesses and workers, I'm going to go back to the comments from Premier Doug Ford in Ontario, who understands this issue very clearly, obviously has a much clearer understanding than the Leader of the Opposition, when he said that this agreement will allow approximately $300 billion worth of goods to move across the border, creating opportunities and jobs. And the Prime Minister did an excellent job in getting this deal done. So if we talk about specifically what that means for Canada, for Ontario, and for the United States and Michigan, it means faster and more reliable trade, more predictable delivery schedules, reduced shipping delays, reduced fuel costs, lower risk of supply chain disruptions for just-in-time deliveries, and greater resilience from if there is a problem with another crossing. And that was one of the imperatives that led to the construction of the Gordie Howe Bridge in the first place, was following 9/11, that realization that Canada's most important border crossing with our most important trade partner was at risk of redundancy if there was a problem at the Ambassador Bridge. It also means stronger manufacturing and supply chains. As I said, keeping factories supplied with parts. They're highly integrated manufacturing sectors on both sides of the border, reducing production interruptions and supporting those manufacturers throughout Ontario and Michigan. Increasing opportunities for Canadian workers. I talked about in my initial comments the impact that the value of the construction of this project had, but moving forward, the improvements for trucking and logistics, the expanded warehouse and distribution, the state-of-the-art customs facilities for streamlining goods transferring on both sides of the border, making sure that inspections are up to date, that contraband and guns and drugs are seized at the border with state-of-the-art customs facilities. And then specific to, we have a number of members from the Windsor area today, so thank you for joining us on committee this afternoon. But specifically for businesses in the Windsor and the surrounding area benefiting from that increased economic opportunity. More customers for hotels and restaurants and retailers, increased demand for transportation and logistics, and just an overall greater investment in industrial and commercial development in those specific geographic areas on both sides of the border. We already talked about lower transportation costs. The province of Ontario, when this bridge was originally proposed, the province of Ontario put in over $1 billion of highway improvements to ensure that there were seamless connections to the province of Ontario, the Canadian highway network, and the same was done on the U.S. side. So you have that seamless connection between the I-75 on going south and the 400 series highways in Ontario, which is critical importance. So for quality of life in Windsor and in Detroit, taking those transport trucks and traffic off of city streets and putting it on to the 400 series highways and the interstate highways where they should be. And then finally, the just increase in investment confidence that this certainty brings to businesses and workers on both sides of the border. That is probably the number one thing that we are dealing with right now as a country, as Canadians, is the ongoing uncertainty with the United States. And I think we should all be very proud that getting this bridge opening, finalizing this deal, puts in certainty to this critical trade corridor, and that businesses on both sides of the borders can now have certainty when it comes to that cross-border trade. So, with that, I'll leave my comments there, and I'm sure my colleagues will have some additional things to say on the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Elvis. And then Mr. Sorose, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm certainly happy to hear that there is one federal Liberal that still talks positively about Doug Ford and what he feels about transportation. I'm sure he'll go to bed feeling better about that. But this is simply Mr. Chair, the motion and the amendment were obviously there so that the government could have some comfort. This was written, the whole motion, including the amendment, was written to give members of the Liberal Party a little bit of comfort. Now, it may be cold comfort, but it still was comfort that they could have something where they could talk about. They obviously are opposed to any scrutiny whatsoever when it comes to this deal. To me, that says right away that there's something wrong here. They've known it from the beginning of it. The fact that they wouldn't mention or speak to the motion or rarely even the amendment itself just shows that they are opposed. So I just would encourage all members, vote. I would encourage you to vote for it, but let's just get to a vote. Let's let democracy happen here. Let's let our constituents know whether or not we are with them and transparency in doing our jobs, or that we'll just to be cynical about it and vote against it. Because you want to cover for the government.
The floor is yours. Thanks, Mr. Elvis.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor once again. Listen, out of respect for colleagues who've traveled here, colleagues who should be in their writing right now, to speak to their constituents, I'd like to note as well, because it's been said that we're filibustering, but that's not at all what we're doing. We've laid out, and I thank colleagues for having added the amendment in question, because that's what we've been talking about since the beginning of this amendment. I'd like to note, as my colleague has, that the Leader of the Opposition was here for about 20 minutes, which took time from this committee, time we could have used to discuss this motion. So, given that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose that we adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn. We'll take a vote.
Mr. Danko? Mr. Gasparo?
Yep.
Madame Rochefort?
Oui.
Madame Desrochers?
Oui.
Madame Lalonde?
Oui.
Mr. Albus?
No.
Ms. Lanceman?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
No.
Madame Gaudreau?
No.
5 yeas, 4 nays.
With that, it is carried. We are adjourned.